just sad.
So where's the benefit?
Yeah, there's
You know, when
none.
you weigh that cost-benefit analysis, you know, when you weigh that, and it is sad. It is
So
sad.
could it get to the point where nobody accepts it?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, what is?
Let's hope not.
I mean, so you have
Let's
to,
hope
what do
not.
these people have to do, go and just search for someone who will accept Medicare?
Well, they are.
That's been going on for quite a while.
And so what does that do to access? You know, that's kind of in that triad that I mentioned.
Well,
It's
funny
just,
because my husband had just said to me the other night, he goes, I don't understand. My father, you know, ended up back in the hospital and they did an MRI, they did all these things. He goes, how come your father can get all these tests done for free and my parents, my father, his father can't get his knees fixed? And I'm like, well, isn't he on Medicare? He goes, yeah. I said, well, everybody thinks that. That's what I said, you know, and now I'm hearing this and I'm like, maybe his parents are right. That whoever they're going to isn't accepting their Medicare, is that what it is, and is that why they can't get?
They usually have a notice right in the front, you know, as you walk into a hospital or a clinic that says, you know, we do not accept, you know,
Such and
only
such insurances.
whatever insurance. They will, you know. they will-
I've seen that, like,
Yeah.
but I didn't expect it for somebody who's, you know, retired.
Yeah, but they have these plans too, like Tufts, Medicare Preferred, or
there is a
something like
major
that.
hospital here in New Hampshire, I'm not sure which one off the top of my head, but they've decided not to accept Medicare.
Okay.
Not sure off the top.
And there are like some, like, you can choose instead of Medicare, you can, like, maybe like Humana, I know, you can get that, and they
They
can
didn't
tell
exist.
Medicare.
They didn't exist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just, but you tell Medicare you're not taking it.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
because my mother has Tufts Medicare Preferred, so, yeah, she's still getting Medicare.
But that's her secondary?
That's her secondary.
Yeah.
Her primary is the Tufts Med, and so they pay for just about everything.
But
So-
does she have
Well,
to
they're
pay?
taking
has to
so
pay
many
the-
funds
yeah,
away, I mean, that
Medicare's
it's.
free, right?
And Medicare's free.
Sad.
yes.
So why would you want to pay for something if you can get?
It picks up what Medicare doesn't pay.
Right. Yeah.
What's that, Medicare C?
Well, the Medicare, yeah, because it's the secondary insurance, so it'll pick up whatever Medicare isn't paying, so it's made for seniors, you know.
Medicare Advantage.
Yeah, depends, yeah, so there's different plans out there.
Right.
Yeah.
You'll do that in reimbursement methods.
But it's such a huge market, I mean, how can they just say, we're not taking you, and then.
Well,
it
it's the
sounds like a
same thing
lawsuit.
that they've done to people who have pre-existing illnesses. You know, they consider it a risk pool.
I mean, I
So
know
it's the same-
Exeter Hospital's threatened to like cut Blue Cross Blue Shield off, you know, several times.
Well, they did have
Yeah.
an issue, but
Yeah.
now I think Blue Cross Blue Shield is only with 3 hospitals in the state, and Exeter is one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they have Anthem here, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the state, that's the, so. It's very interesting, but that Healthy People 2020, you know, it's pretty, it's good to see what they have coming. I think that it's definitely a foundation. It's, you know, there's a lot of proposals in there for good stuff. But when you kind of, you know, look at the whole scope of everything, it's like, oh, wow. Like I said, the perfect storm, just with everything coming on board. The electronic health records have to be implemented by this year. Or healthcare organizations, if they haven't converted, they have to start paying. So they have to meet meaningful use, or they have to actually start paying the fine to Medicare. It's kind of going through the whole, you know, the whole gamut of everything, where it's almost like, you know, of course, yes, healthcare is, you know, it's a lucrative business. It's a business.
At the facility I work at, I need electronic records.
You know, what, it's a nursing home?
Yeah.
Nursing homes, I believe they have until 2016, but they have to be able to meet ASC X12 requirements in order to submit their claims electronically or,
I don't think she would have that. Their one starts with your day in December.
yeah.
I'm just like,
So-
hopefully I won't be there to see that.
But one of the things that they have a lot of coders doing is monitoring, because of course the quality, you know, the quality is still key. Quality in the care that's provided to the patients. So one of the things that they have a lot of coders doing is monitoring those codes, the different procedures that are performed, the different, you know, what are the top 10 diagnoses performed here? What are the top 10 procedures performed here? So being able to know, you know, that's why I was thinking about possibly doing this little statistical thing in here, is just so that you can kind of get an idea of how the codes communicate that quality and information back to the healthcare organization so that they can kind of project. With everything that's kind of going on out there, at least that way they can get an idea or a clear picture of how this all kind of works together, how the coding aspect fits in. So, it's a function, but it's a big function. I mean, if you think about it, it's what drives the reimbursement back to the healthcare organization. If it weren't for quotas, you know, and astute quotas, then the healthcare organization is only going to get a percentage back. That's why we did that CAC assignment where it's only 70% accurate. Could you imagine healthcare organizations only getting 70% of the money that they were due? Ouch. It just would not be a good thing. So, back on track? Cardiovascular coding. So there are quite a few different illustrations in the very beginning of this section of the CPT. We have the diagrams of the different the arterial and the venous arteries and veins. We have some diagrams there, but again, that Appendix L has more information of breaking them down. You won't have to utilize that, but when you're looking at some of these terms, you know, definitely look them up and use the diagrams to kind of get an idea of what whereabouts they're located within the bodily system. One thing that I had, I think it was the other CPT class this summer, but a student had asked me where the body is broken down in its particular, you know, what's considered the trunk, what's considered, do you all have that same question? As far as what's the trunk, what's considered the, I can't remember the other terms, but it was kind of like breaking down bodies, not by planes, but just knowing, you know, I think we talked about it briefly in week 1, but just breaking it down so that you can kind of have a diagram to know. So I'm working on actually creating a diagram that breaks down the different bodily systems so that you know when it says trunk area, what the trunk is. Because I think that, you know, thinking backside, but it wasn't. So that's, I think would be beneficial to kind of have that as one of your tools. So I am working on that. You guys will see how good of an artist I am. I can email well. So we do have some great illustrations in this particular area. So of course, when we're talking about the cardiovascular system, we are talking about an introduction of something into the body, right? There are a number of different types of selective catheterizations used in these particular procedures, so keep that in mind when you're looking at, and a lot of these are included, they're grouped in. So again, eyes up, eyes down, make sure you're looking at those terms and those little notes that come before a lot of these different, some have more than others in this particular section, so just kind of be mindful of that, just to get an idea of you know, any additional information that you may need. We see the information for the pacemaker or the pacing cardioverter and defibrillator. We do see that. So we've got a couple of different, again, we're seeing some information on those leads that we had talked about, or the different, the batteries. So we've got some defining terms in that particular section. And then on the following pages where you see our definitions for the single lead, the dual lead, and the multiple lead. And again, those are essentially telling us the number of chambers where the pacemaker or the electrodes are being placed. On the following page, we have a pretty easy to use chart. This chart is pretty much for transvenous procedures that are performed. You can almost match up your one-liners with this particular chart. I'm calling it a chart, it's somewhat of a table. You can line them up, and then the system that's used, see how it's kind of in two separate columns? We've got the system that's used, whether it be the defibrillator or the pacemaker. So it breaks it down so you can almost, again, you're not going to code directly from here, but at least let it direct you to the appropriate code once you know what the device was and what the type of procedure that was performed was. And then look at your descriptor to match it up a little bit more, or look for that higher level of specificity in the code ranges or the particular code that you can narrow it down to. Just kind of flipping through. A lot of diagrams in here. There are some coding notes. You're going to see some revised codes in this particular section. Some codes out of sequence. There's quite a few in this section. You're going to see quite a few out of sequence. Coding tips. Again, how many of you look at the coding tips? They're pretty informative, actually. Because they also give you an idea of different things to look for, too, in some of your documentation. Under the electrophysiologic operative procedures, we've got a couple of definitions, both limited and extensive. So again, we have defining terms, kind of like that intermediate. Everybody with me there? So we have a couple of defining terms there, and then we also have a coding tip on reporting restriction to operative tissue ablation. So we've got, again, a lot of endoscopic procedures performed in this particular section, catheterizations. We've got a lot of that you'll see as you're kind of working through the coding exercises. Under the cardiac valves, we've got a number of notes. There are a lot of notes in this particular section of the CPT. And of course, you see that TAVR and the TAVI abbreviations being used. Again, we want to make sure that we're looking up the appropriate procedure. So that if you're not sure what an acronym is, we're going to look it up, right? Again, I'm sure that a lot of you will come back and say, I don't want to cardiac code, but again, it could be something that you may really enjoy too, so don't let me deter you. In that particular section, we have our different valves broken down. We've got the pulmonary, the tricuspid, and the mitral valve. Again, let's make sure we're in the appropriate section. On the following page, we start to see some venous grafting taking place. And that would be done for coronary bypass. So you're going to see some angioplasty taking place in this particular section. Different types of complex cardiac anomalies. Venous anomalies. So we're looking at a few different types of anomalies. I'm just kind of flipping through a little bit. Transposition of the great vessels. This is where all of that, the atrial and the venous, that information would come into play, those different families, those different classifications. We've got some root remodeling, repairs, heart and lung transplant. Again, this is where we've got our cadaver, donor, benchmark work, and then our recipient heart. We have some different types of terms and definitions to be used there. These notes will tell us whether or not it includes specific types of grafts. Cardiac assist. We've got some information on that device. And then we have, it breaks it down further into different types, whether it's a single device or single ventricle assist. have repairs of aneurysms, and that breaks it down again by our separate categories within the cardiovascular system. Angioplasty, you see some of that taking place in here. Again, how the procedure is performed, whether it's open, percutaneous. Those are definitely terms that we need to make sure that we're in the appropriate section. Because again, we start from the beginning, kind of like A to Z, as we're going through for each particular section, so it's easy to end up on the wrong page. So we always check everything twice, right? Making a list and checking it twice. You gotta make sure that you're doing that when it comes to coding. Even, it's easy to transpose your numbers too, sometimes. And you're taking and writing them down, it's so easy, Even when you're out there in industry, to make your little notes of the codes you want to look up. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've seen coders like go to look up the code, and then it's like, I'm not finding anything, and then have to go back and look it up again, and it's like, oh, the wrong, you know what I mean? I transpose the 1 and the 5, so just, it's easy. I mean, and that's part of the process, is always making sure that you're double checking your codes. And of course, we're going to double check it 2 or 3 times before we put it on the claims form, right? So we've got bypass grafts in this particular section. Again, this is where the veins play a major role. We see more about the grafts that are being performed. Vascular injection procedures that are being performed. Has anybody ever heard of the lab test PTR? Anybody ever heard of that one? PTR? When we look at the laboratory services, that's where you're going to see that one. But for this particular service, there is a illustration for code 36002, and what PTR is it's a test that actually measures the clotting ability of the blood. So a lot of the times when you see this procedure performed, you're going to see that laboratory service being performed at the same time. They changed the name of it. It is. You've got it.
I know what
Got
it
it.
is.
Oh no, that's the time. I'm using the acronym. I'm using the acronym. But you've got it, Carol. You've got it. So in this next section, especially where this is beginning, that's where you're going to see a few pages worth of notes. I'm not sure if any of you have looked ahead a little bit, but there's a few pages there of specific information for these particular. And you know, I don't expect you to take and sit and read through the entire thing before you sit down and start coding. You know, take a look at it if the question arises. Again, you don't have to memorize everything, but if you see that there's specific notes for a code that you're working on assigning, that's when you need to pay attention to it. You may not look at this section or need to know what this particular page of information, I should say, or look at this code unless you're using it in industry. So keep that in mind. You know where to find it. So there's quite a few notes there. There's a diagram showing the angiography, the carotid artery. So that is broken down into the different types of artery used in that particular procedure. Following page, we have the venipuncture. We've got some venous information for different diagnostic studies for intravenous therapy. Everybody with me still? Okay. Coding tip underneath that, instructions for use of the CPT code book. Does everyone see that one? And it's kind of breaking down for this particular section, the best method for using. I'm under the,
$220.
oh, okay, yeah, you got it?